Let's talk more about it with Richard Johnson. He's a lecturer in U.S. politics and international relations at Lancaster University in England. I would imagine, Richard, your job has become more interesting, perhaps, with all the developments and goings on that we must follow here in the United States. So first, I want to ask you, what do you think of what we're hearing from Dershowitz there and the fact that Mr. Trump is also using Ken Starr on his team, who impeached Bill Clinton? Of course, we heard the president made extremely disparaging remarks about Starr years ago and now hires him.
I think it's very interesting what's happening. I think there's a bit of a subtle shift in the arguments that the president's defenders have been making as of late. I think as the evidence comes out more clearly of the president's involvement in this Ukraine scandal, and the latest from Lev Parnas underlines that now what they're arguing is not so much whether or not he was implicated in these actions of putting pressure on the Ukrainian government, but whether that rises to the level of a high crime that a president should be removed from office. Is it a high crime rather than a crime, as the language of the Constitution sets out? And so this was a similar argument that was made, I guess, at in the time of the Clinton trial, where it almost wasn't in doubt that Clinton had committed perjury. It was whether that perjury amounted to a high crime for him to be removed from office. And I think that is sort of subtly what we're getting to now from the president's defenders.
And at that time, Kenneth Starr, his investigation went on and on and on. He even tried to involve the Secret Service in testimony. He even reached out to Monica Lewinsky's boyfriends. I mean, he was very thorough. And now he is saying he's representing the president and doesn't believe there needs to be witnesses and testimonies. How does that square?
Yeah, because in that respect, things are very different from the Clinton impeachment. We had the Starr report in the late 1990s, which was an extremely thorough investigation conducted by Ken Starr into all matters relating to the Lewinsky scandal and around it. In this case, there was no special prosecutor's report for the House to send over to the Senate. The House had to conduct its own investigations using its own committees. And some of the witnesses that the House wanted to speak to them were blocked by the president. And now there is, I think, a compelling argument to be made that those witnesses, who some of them have now made it be known that they would be willing to speak to the Senate, should be heard. That for the fact of the completeness of the record of this trial, that those voices cannot be ignored. That they must be brought into the proceedings.
And I want to talk with you about this new evidence from Lev Parnas. He's been all over the news with the New York Times, with Anderson Cooper. If that's allowed, that perhaps in the impeachment trial, it could have an impact. Do you think this is a spot where Democrats may try to move to bring in evidence? That has been their goal from the start for this trial, and it seems to have gone nowhere so far.
Well, my understanding is that Lev Parnas's documentary evidence that he's provided managed to get sent over to the Senate from the House Intelligence Committee as part of the tranche of evidence that the House sent over to the Senate through Congressman Nadler, who's the chairman. I guess what remains is whether or not someone like Lev Parnas ought to be a witness in the trial. And if we use the analogy that the House is a grand jury, which is indicting the president, and the Senate is the actual trial, it's not unusual in a trial to have new evidence entered into that trial and to have witnesses heard in that trial. And so I think it's perfectly legitimate for people to suggest that figures like that Parnas should be considered as witnesses in this trial.
And we know that the American public has sent a strong message. They want a fair trial. Well, Tuesday will be interesting when it gets underway. We'll likely talk with you again. Richard Johnson, thanks so much.
Thank you.